Snow fell across the town of Silver Creek, covering everything in a heavy, unbroken silence. A lonely veteran and his loyal dog, Max, walked their usual patrol, their footprints marking the endless white road beneath the winter sky. Beneath a snow-covered bench, they found a miracle frozen in time. A small boy, trembling, clutching his chest, lips pale and shaking, whispering only two words: "The water hurts." From that moment, a truth long buried beneath the ice began to stir, and what they uncovered afterward would change an entire town forever. Proving that sometimes angels don't come with wings, but with four paws, a loyal heart, and a courage that speaks in silence. If you still believe that loyalty and courage have a place in this world, join us on this journey by following Healing with Max. And wherever you are tonight, may the quiet fire of kindness in your heart stay warm enough to reach someone trembling out there in the cold. Snow had a sound in Silver Creek, a soft hush that could drown the noise of everything broken. It fell all night, coating the roofs, the quiet cars, the crooked mailbox that had forgotten how to stand straight. Street lamps glowed like dying candles, their light thinning through the mist, painting halos on the falling white. If anyone had walked past the corner of Alder and Fifth, they might have thought the world was asleep. But not everyone sleeps when the world grows quiet. Raymond Cole did not. The old veteran walked with the rhythm of habit, his boots pressing gentle prints into the snow, his breath rising slow, as if he feared even exhaling too loudly would disturb the silence. He was 58, wrapped in an olive-green jacket that had outlived the wars he fought in. His hands were calloused, the left one slightly trembling when the cold crept too deep. Beneath his breath, he sometimes muttered names, half prayers, half apologies, carried away by the wind before he ever finished them. Beside him padded Max, a German shepherd whose fur had grayed around the muzzle, though the eyes still burned gold. He moved like a whisper, strong, steady, older than he looked. The two of them were a strange pair in that lonely town. One man who couldn't stop walking, and one dog who refused to leave his side. That night, the snow fell heavier than it had all week. The wind turned corners into secrets. Somewhere far off, the river groaned under ice, and Raymond slowed his pace. He didn't know why. He just did. It was instinct, the same kind that had kept him alive when reason failed. Then Max stopped. No bark, no growl, just stillness. Ears erect, nose trembling. The leash grew taut between them. Raymond followed the dog's gaze toward the bus stop bench buried halfway in snow. The lamplight flickered, then steadied again, casting long shadows over the frozen ground. And then came the sound. A faint, cracked breath, soft, human. Raymond's pulse shifted. He took 2 steps, boots crunching, and the snow seemed to swallow the sound again. "Easy, boy," he whispered, though his own voice was shaking. He crouched down, brushed the snow aside, and saw it, just barely, the outline of a small body tucked under the bench. At first he thought it was a trick of the storm. Then Max moved closer, pressed his muzzle against the figure, and a low whine escaped his throat. The man knelt fully now. His knees protested, but he didn't care. His glove brushed against cloth, wet, cold, trembling. He pushed away more snow until a child's face appeared, pale as candle wax, lashes frozen together, lips the color of dusk. God. Raymond's breath caught. Hey, son, can you hear me?" The boy stirred faintly. His breath came shallow and broken. His coat was torn at the sleeve, and when Raymond lifted the fabric, he froze. There was no arm beneath, only a carved piece of wood, smoothed by time and held to the shoulder by worn leather straps. He didn't understand why, but that sight, so fragile, so human, cut deeper than any wound he'd carried from war. Then the boy's lips moved. So soft, Raymond almost thought it was the wind speaking through him. "Water. Hurts." 2 words, barely a whisper. Yet they shattered the quiet of the night like glass. Raymond blinked. "What?" But the boy's head rolled weakly to the side, his breath faltering. He acted before thought could interfere. He slipped off his scarf, wrapped it around the child's neck, checked the pulse with unsteady fingers. Weak, but there. He lifted the boy, the child's body feather-light against his chest. Snowflakes gathered on his lashes, melting as they fell. Max pressed close to his leg, body tense, eyes locked on the road ahead. As they began to move, the street lamp above them flickered again, once, twice, and then burned crimson for a heartbeat, as if warning them. Raymond turned his head, scanning the empty street, but saw nothing, only shadows and snow. He shifted the boy higher in his arms and kept walking. The town around him blurred into shapes, shuttered windows, the faint outline of the church steeple, the hum of distant wires singing in the cold. Max led the way, his breath forming brief halos in the dark. "Water hurts." The words kept echoing in Raymond's head, looping between memory and fear. He had heard pain expressed 1,000 ways, screams, prayers, silence, but never like that. They passed the old diner, its neon sign still flickering open though no one had been there in hours. He thought of waking someone, anyone, but instinct told him not to stop. Whatever had happened to this boy, whoever left him there, it wasn't random. He crossed Main Street, boots slipping slightly on ice. In his periphery, something glinted under the snow, metal catching light. He crouched for a heartbeat, still holding the child, and brushed it free. A small silver locket, chain tangled, edges worn smooth. He pocketed it without thinking. The hospital wasn't far, maybe 2 blocks, yet each step stretched longer, heavier. Raymond's heart hammered in his chest. He could feel the boy's faint warmth fading, like a candle burning its last inch of wick. "Stay with me, son," he murmured. "You'll be all right. You will." Max whined softly, glancing back as if to urge him faster. Snow whipped harder now, stinging his face. The wind had a voice. It moaned through the alleyways like a warning, and beneath it, faint and rhythmic, another sound began, a hum that didn't belong to the storm. It came from beyond the bridge at the edge of town, deep, mechanical, steady. Red light flared once more, distant but pulsing, slow, deliberate, alive. Max stopped again, head low, growl rumbling in his chest. Raymond turned, scanning the ridge beyond the frozen creek. The glow shimmered behind the trees, like a heartbeat beneath the snow. He hesitated, every instinct screaming to look closer. But the boy in his arms trembled, whispering something incoherent, and that was enough. He tightened his grip, turned away from the light, and pressed forward. The last stretch to Silver Creek Medical felt endless. The world narrowed to sound, the crunch of boots, Max's steady panting, the rasp of the boy's breath against Raymond's coat. Time folded, space blurred, and when he reached the hospital's rear entrance, he didn't remember crossing the last street. Inside, fluorescent light bled through frosted glass. He could see figures moving, nurses, a security guard, a door swinging open. But for one long moment, Raymond just stood there in the snow, holding the boy close, Max beside him. The child's small wooden arm rested against his chest, cold and smooth. The words still echoed. Water hurts. He looked once more toward the horizon. The red light still pulsed faintly through the fog, distant, steady, almost patient. And as the door swung open and voices called out for help, the camera of memory would have lingered there, on the trembling hand of a child clutching at Max's fur, and on the face of a man who, for the first time in years, felt the chill of something larger than war, a secret waiting beneath the snow. Fluorescent lights hummed like restless insects inside Silver Creek Medical, pale and cold against the gray dawn pressing at the windows. The hallways smelled of disinfectant and snow, that strange blend of bleach and frost that made time itself move slower. Raymond stood near the doorway, his jacket still damp from the storm, the fabric stiff and heavy. He didn't sit. He never sat. His eyes stayed fixed on the small figure beneath the thin hospital blanket, on the rise and fall of a chest that fought for every inch of breath. Doctors moved quietly around the room, their words floating through the air like shards of glass. Lead levels elevated. Blood contamination. Not frostbite. Each phrase struck him harder than the cold he'd left outside. It was not the winter that was killing the boy. It was something older, quieter, buried deeper than the snow. A nurse, young with tired eyes, adjusted a line of clear tubes feeding into the boy's arm. The liquid inside looked harmless, almost beautiful under the light, like melted glass. She turned to whisper something to the attending physician, a man in his late 40s with the kind of calm that comes from seeing too much. He wore his exhaustion neatly, in the loosened tie and the dark crescents beneath his eyes. His name tag read Dr. Avery Houghton. His voice was low, steady, and terribly certain. If he survives the next 12 hours, we can stabilize him. But this isn't exposure. It's poisoning. Raymond's jaw tightened. Poisoning from what? The doctor hesitated. We'll need to confirm. But if the water's the source, he's not the first we've seen. His eyes flickered briefly toward the floor, then back to the chart. Not that anyone wants to talk about it. Raymond said nothing. He just looked at the boy again, the child who had whispered from beneath the snow. The boy's hair was dark and matted to his forehead. His skin carried that strange grayish hue that spoke of sickness long before words could. Someone had cleaned his face, but they hadn't been able to scrub away the fear. A clipboard clicked near the window. The nurse scribbled something, then turned to him. You found him by the creek, right? Near Alder Street? He nodded. Her pen froze mid-stroke. That's where the runoff pools. The doctor shot her a warning look, but it was too late. The words were out, hovering like frost between them. Raymond didn't ask more. He didn't need to. The answer was already forming, heavy and poisonous, just like the air in the room. Max sat by the door, his fur still damp, paws leaving faint prints on the tile. The big shepherd hadn't moved since they arrived. He watched the boy as if guarding something sacred, golden eyes steady, unreadable. Every now and then, when the boy's breathing hitched, Max's ears would twitch and his tail would sweep the floor once, an instinctive reassurance that he was still there. Raymond watched that too. There was a quiet understanding between the two, a soldier recognizing another wounded soul. He didn't have to say it. Max already knew. Some kinds of pain didn't need translation. The boy's hand shifted slightly under the blanket. His fingers, thin and raw, clung to the carved wooden prosthetic resting on his chest. The way he gripped it, fierce, protective, made Raymond's chest ache. It wasn't just a limb to the child. It was something to hold on to when the world took everything else. Hours passed in that slow crawl of hospital time, where minutes stretched and machines blinked without emotion. Outside, the snow kept falling, soft and relentless, painting the parking lot in a sheen of white that reflected the sterile glow from inside. The storm had quieted, but somehow the silence felt heavier. When Raymond finally turned toward the door, Max didn't follow. The dog remained seated, his body rigid, gaze locked on the child. "Come on," Raymond whispered, tugging gently at the leash. Max refused to move. His low rumble filled the room, not anger, but refusal, a silent vow. Raymond sighed and let the leash fall slack. "All right then, you stay." He stepped closer to the bed. "You hang on, kid," he murmured. "You fought this far. Don't stop now." The boy's eyelids fluttered. For a second, Raymond thought it was a reflex, a tremor. Then a dry sound escaped his lips, something between a breath and a word. The nurse straightened, reaching for the oxygen line, but Raymond raised a hand. Samuel. That's what they had called him. Samuel Bennett. 8 years old, malnourished, poisoned from within. Now Samuel's lips moved again, faint cracks along their edges. His voice, when it came, was barely more than air. "Mama drank it." His eyes, half open, stared through the ceiling as if seeing something far away. "She drank it, and she slept. She wouldn't wake up." The nurse froze. The doctor's pen slipped from his fingers. The only sound left was the steady hiss of the oxygen line. Raymond felt the air leave his lungs in one long, quiet sigh. He met the doctor's eyes, and in that silence, something unspoken passed between them. Two truths colliding in the same cold room. The child's mother was gone, and the town's water was killing more than thirst. No one spoke after that. There was nothing left to say. Raymond stood there a long while, watching the slow rhythm of Samuel's breathing, the trembling of small fingers wrapped around carved wood. Then he reached down, brushed the boy's hair once, and whispered something only Max seemed to hear. By the time he stepped outside, the sky had begun to pale. Dawn broke without warmth, light spilling across the hospital's stone walls in a muted gray. The snow beneath the window glistened faintly, not pure white but streaked with the faintest tint of ash, as if the earth itself had swallowed poison. Raymond pulled his coat tight, breath fogging before him. Max joined him quietly, pressing close against his leg. Together they stood there for a long moment, staring at the gray snow melting beneath the morning sun. The morning came slow, crawling over the white hills like an animal afraid to breathe. The wind carried the faint scent of metal and pine, a bitter mixture that made Raymond narrow his eyes as he followed the narrow road leading out of town. The snow was thinner here, scattered like ash. Somewhere behind him, the hospital faded into mist. Ahead lay the creek, a dark ribbon winding through the valley, half frozen, half alive. Max moved ahead, nose to the wind, his gait measured and certain. His breath rose in small white bursts, dissolving in the cold. Every few steps he stopped, sniffed the air, and looked back as if asking for permission to go further. Raymond gave a small nod. The leash hung loose between them, a quiet symbol of trust, earned through years of silence. The boy's words still echoed in Raymond's mind. Mama drank it, and she wouldn't wake up. Those words were a compass now, pulling him toward this place where the water turned wrong. The creek looked clear at first glance, running beneath sheets of ice that glittered under the weak sun. But when he knelt and brushed the surface with his gloved hand, he saw it, a shimmer beneath the ice, faintly metallic, like oil catching the light. The kind of beauty that only poison could make. He followed the current upstream until the trees thinned, revealing an old water tower rising crooked above the frozen field. Its metal was rusted, its base wrapped in dead vines. Beneath it stood a man. Raymond slowed, scanning him the way soldiers do when they meet a stranger in open land. The man was tall but stooped, wrapped in a thick brown coat that smelled of smoke even from a distance. A fur cap shadowed his eyes, but not enough to hide the way they burned. Two gray flames inside a weathered face. His beard was wild, streaked white like frost, and in his hands he held a walking stick carved from cedar. "Didn't think anyone still came out this way," the man said. His voice was gravel and grief mixed together. "Name's Cole," Raymond answered simply. The man gave a curt nod. "Coulter. Raymond Coulter. Used to trap along the ridge." The coincidence of names made both men pause. Then Coulter looked toward the creek, spitting into the snow. "They said it's just runoff, from the mine. But runoff doesn't melt snow like acid." Raymond glanced down. The snow near the water's edge was indeed pitted and gray, like something had eaten through it from below. "You've seen it happen?" "Seen it?" Coulter let out a laugh that wasn't laughter. "I buried a granddaughter because of it. 5 years old. The doctors called it infection. Said her organs shut down for no reason. But I knew. You can smell poison before you can name it." He turned toward his small campsite under the tower. An iron kettle, a tarp stiff with frost, a small fire burning low. From beside the fire, he lifted a dented metal lunchbox and handed it to Raymond. The box was cold, heavier than it looked. "She gave me this," Coulter said. "Said if anything happened to her, I should pass it to someone who still believes in truth." Raymond opened it slowly. Inside were folded papers, brittle at the edges, covered in columns of numbers and chemical symbols. Among them, a few handwritten notes signed with a name, Sadie Bennett. The name struck him like a bell. Samuel's mother. "She worked at the Silverpure plant, didn't she?" Raymond asked quietly. Coulter nodded. "Office clerk, at first. But she got smart, started pulling records, water samples, names, sent copies to a reporter in Richmond. But the paper burned down a week later. They said electrical fault. I say lies don't like daylight." The fire popped softly between them. Max stepped closer to the lunchbox, sniffed the metal, and let out a low whine. Raymond closed the lid halfway. She had proof, and they silenced her. Coulter's voice broke into the cold like an axe into wood. "That woman died trying to warn this town. And the worst part? Folks still drink from the same tap that killed her." He looked away, shoulders trembling not from the cold, but from rage too old to fade. Raymond studied him. The man looked hollowed out, carved by guilt and winters too long. Yet in his eyes was something stubborn, something that refused to die. "I'll take it," Raymond said. "Whatever's in here, it won't stay buried." Coulter stared at him for a long moment, then gave a slow nod. "Careful who you trust, soldier. Truth's got enemies with better boots than yours." Raymond almost smiled. Wouldn't be the first time. They stood in silence for a while, the wind threading through the tower's ribs, making it moan like something alive. Raymond could feel the weight of the lunchbox against his palm, a cold verdict waiting to be read. He turned toward the creek once more. The water below the ice pulsed faintly, black and silver, reflecting the sky in broken pieces. He thought of Samuel's small hand gripping that wooden arm, of the boy's whisper about the water, of a mother who'd tried to warn the world and paid the price. For the first time in years, Raymond bowed his head and prayed, not for peace, but for courage. Behind him, Max stiffened, the shepherd's ears pinned back, nose twitching toward the ridge above them. Raymond followed his gaze. At first, it was only the glint of sunlight on metal. Then came the shape. A black SUV moving slow along the crest, its windows tinted, its engine almost silent. The kind of silence that only money could afford. Coulter saw it too. "You should go," he murmured. "They don't like witnesses." Raymond slipped the lunchbox inside his coat and zipped it shut. The sound of metal against metal snapped through the valley like a gunshot. He met Coulter's eyes one last time. "If they come looking, you never saw me." The old trapper smiled without humor. "Ain't seen much worth remembering anyway." Raymond turned toward the trail, Max close to his side. The SUV paused at the ridge, its headlights flickering once, like a wink from something that didn't need eyes to see. The lunchbox in Raymond's hand clicked shut, echoing through the hollow valley like a verdict. The storm returned that evening, as if it had been waiting for its cue. Wind scraped against the hospital windows, howling like something alive, and the corridors inside had gone unnaturally quiet. The nurses spoke in whispers, moving with the slow, rehearsed rhythm of exhaustion. The hum of the vents mixed with the soft tick of a clock that never seemed to move. Raymond walked those halls again, his boots echoing against the linoleum like a memory that refused to fade. His coat still smelled of pine and rust. His thoughts of duty unfinished. He hadn't slept since the night before. Every hallway looked the same, every doorway a mirror to somewhere he didn't want to return. He could still hear Samuel's small voice in his head, the way it trembled when he said, "Water hurts." That sentence had burrowed deep into him, gnawing like regret. He told himself the boy was safe now, that the hospital's walls could keep the darkness out. But as he turned the corner toward room 203, something in him knew better. The lights above flickered once, then steadied. The air had changed, heavier, colder. He pushed open the door, half expecting the steady beeping of monitors, the faint rhythm of a child's breath beneath the storm. But the sound was gone. The bed was empty, sheets tangled and thrown aside. The IV line dripped steadily, untethered. The window was cracked open just enough for the wind to hiss through, scattering snowflakes across the floor. For a second, he stood frozen, his body refusing to believe what his eyes told him. Then his soldier's mind took over. He checked the bathroom, the closet, even under the bed, each space an echo of his growing dread. A paper cup lay crushed near the nightstand, small enough to have been held in a child's hand. The air reeked faintly of antiseptic and something colder, metallic, like the scent that lingers after blood. Then came the sound that broke the silence in half. A growl, low, deep, and furious. Max was already moving, his paws sliding slightly on the sterile floor as he tore down the corridor, nose pressed low, tail stiff, muscles coiled with purpose. Raymond's heart surged with panic, that same cold rush he'd felt under fire years ago. He followed, breath ragged, limp more pronounced, but he didn't stop. They passed startled nurses, white uniforms blurring in the flashing red of emergency lights. Someone shouted for security, but the storm outside roared louder, swallowing human sound. The hall lights dimmed, blinked, then glowed crimson. For a moment, Raymond's mind betrayed him. The red glow painted the walls like the field hospitals overseas. He heard again the sirens, the shells, the cries that came just before silence. He shook it off and ran harder. Max reached the service exit first. He slammed against the door until the latch gave way. The night struck them like a wall of ice. Snow whipped sideways, slicing the air. The world beyond was a chaos of gray and white, blinding, merciless. But there, just beyond the loading dock, small footprints marked the snow. Uneven, dragging, a child's. Raymond's throat tightened. "Samuel!" He followed the prints, each one pounding like a heartbeat against his ribs. The path cut across the parking lot, down the embankment, toward the woods. The same direction as the creek, the poisoned water that shimmered beneath the bridge days before. The hospital lights vanished behind him, swallowed by the storm. The forest loomed ahead, dark spines of pine rising through the snow. Max darted ahead, a blur of sable fur and instinct. His growls were the only sound in the world, a living compass cutting through the white void. Branches whipped Raymond's face as he stumbled downhill. The wind screamed in his ears, pulling tears from his eyes. Every breath burned. His bad leg ached, the old wound alive again. For a moment, he saw movement, a flicker of shadow between trees, and his heart lurched. Then he saw it. Down by the frozen creek, headlights shimmered through the haze, a white van idling, back doors open, exhaust spilling like breath into the air. Beside it stood a man. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in dark tactical gear. Black vest, gloves, helmet with no insignia. Calm posture, calculated movements, as if this wasn't abduction but procedure. In his left hand, he held Samuel by the good arm, the boy's small frame half dragged through the snow. Raymond's voice tore through the wind. "Hey!" The man turned. His face was hidden behind a half mask, but his eyes, gray, flat, detached, showed no emotion, no soul. "He's under protective custody," the man said. His voice carried strange through the storm, cold, amplified, mechanical. Raymond's reply came raw from somewhere deep. "No, he's under mine." The wind screamed with him. Max lunged first, a flash of motion, a streak of fury. The man barely raised his arm before Max struck, teeth locking onto the padded sleeve, twisting with trained precision. The world exploded, snow, movement, breath. The sound of struggle swallowed by the blizzard. Raymond charged forward, the ache in his knee forgotten. He grabbed Samuel, wrenching the boy free. The child's face was ghost pale, streaked with tears and frost, lips trembling but soundless. His wooden hand clutched Raymond's coat, as if it were life itself. "It's okay," Raymond whispered. "You're safe now. I've got you." The man swung hard, a blow meant to kill, but Max was faster. The shepherd ducked, twisted, and drove the attacker backward into the snow. Raymond caught a glimpse of the man's torn sleeve, a patch beneath it, silver thread glinting in the stormlight. The logo was unmistakable. Silver Pure Industries. The truth struck like lightning. This wasn't rescue. It was retrieval. The fight ended the way storms do, suddenly, without warning. The man hit the ground, breath bursting from him in a mist of vapor. Max stood over him, chest heaving, fur matted with blood and snow, but eyes bright and unbroken. From the man's radio came a voice, faint, distorted, filtered through static. "We lost the asset." Raymond froze. The word echoed in the dark like a curse. Asset, not boy, not child, asset. He looked down at Samuel, who clung tighter, pressing his small wooden hand against Raymond's chest. "You're not an asset," Raymond said softly. Not while I'm breathing. The van's engine sputtered once, then went still. Snow drifted over its hood, covering it like a shroud. The forest went silent except for the storm and Max's labored breaths. Raymond crouched beside him, hand running down the shepherd's neck. "You did good, boy." Max's tail thumped weakly, one paw streaked red where blood met snow. In the distance, faint blue lights flickered through the curtain of white. Too far to help. Too close to be coincidence. He adjusted his grip on Samuel and stood, leg trembling beneath the weight but unyielding. "Hold on, son," he murmured. "We're going home." Max limped beside them, his leash dragging, the storm swallowing their tracks almost as fast as they were made. The howl of the wind grew louder, but its voice no longer frightened him. It sounded almost like the chorus of every lost soul he'd carried, telling him this time he'd saved the right one. Behind them, the fallen man stirred, lifting his head just enough to watch their shadows fade into white. Blood darkened the snow beneath his gloves. The radio crackled again. "Orders? Track them." But by then, Raymond was gone. The lunchbox of truth pressed cold against his ribs, beating like a second heart. And back by the creek, Max turned once more, standing guard over the man who had called a child an asset. His muzzle bled, his breath came harsh, but his eyes still burned bright through the storm, fierce and unbroken, a lone flame in a world that had almost forgotten what loyalty looked like. The snow had turned to sleet by the time they reached the ridge. The air carried the scent of burning fuel and something else, sharp, chemical, alive in the worst way. Below them, half hidden behind the rise of pine and rock, the Silver Pure facility spread out like a scar across the valley floor. Trucks lined the perimeter, their engines low and rumbling, and the faint orange of floodlights flickered against the storm. Raymond crouched low behind a drift of snow, binoculars raised, Max beside him, breath misting in rhythm with his own. Coulter stood just behind, his gloved hands tight around the camera that had become their only weapon. Down below, the reservoir glimmered, not blue, not clear, but black. Its frozen surface glowed faintly under the industrial lights, and where the ice had cracked, thin streams of water ran slick with an oily sheen. Men in hazmat suits moved in patterns, steady, practiced, like insects around a hive. They dragged hoses toward the water's edge, connected pumps, and the dull whine of machinery rose into the cold night. Each pulse of sound pushed something unseen into the earth, something the snow couldn't bury. Raymond lowered the binoculars. His jaw tightened. "They're still dumping." Coulter leaned forward, his breath a puff of white. "That's not all. Look by the tower." Raymond followed his gaze. Near the base of the rusted water tower, a row of metal crates sat half buried in the slush, their sides stamped with faded hazard symbols. One man knelt beside them, clipping wires, checking timers. Not disposal, detonation. Raymond's hand went to the lunchbox under his coat, the one that had carried Sadie Bennett's truth through storm and blood. He could almost feel it vibrate against his chest, as if the paper and ink inside were calling out to be heard. A voice carried through the wind, sharp, commanding. They looked toward the sound. On a raised scaffold overlooking the reservoir stood a man in a charcoal overcoat and polished black gloves, his hair the color of frost and his expression untouched by the weather. Nathaniel Crane. He didn't shout. He didn't need to. A tilt of his chin sent men moving. His gestures were exact, deliberate, the choreography of a man who'd orchestrated destruction before. His face was pale as the snow he'd poisoned, his calm more terrifying than rage. "Max," Raymond whispered. The dog's ears twitched, amber eyes reflecting the glow from below. "We stop them now." The wind rose like sirens, wailing between the trees. It cut through Raymond's coat, through the ache in his leg, through the memory of every boy he'd buried. Soldiers, sons, ghosts with faces he could still name. He looked at Coulter, who met his gaze without words. For once, neither of them needed a plan. They moved as the storm deepened. Sliding down the ridge was agony. The snow gave way under their boots, the cold biting into the scars on Raymond's knee. Max stayed ahead, weaving through brush, his shape barely visible against the gray. At the edge of the clearing, they stopped behind a truck, close enough to smell the diesel and acid in the air. Coulter lifted the camera. "We need them on record," he said softly. Raymond nodded, his voice low. "And if we don't make it back?" Coulter's expression hardened. "Then make it count." They split, Coulter circling wide to get an angle, Raymond moving toward the pumping station. He crouched by the control unit, fingers trembling as he traced the cables leading to the crates. The lights from the flood lamps painted everything in violent yellow, turning the falling sleet into a cascade of sparks. A guard rounded the corner. Raymond froze, then moved with the instinct of a man who'd been hunted before. He grabbed the nearest wrench and swung, hard and precise. The guard dropped soundlessly into the snow. Max appeared from the shadows, pressing close, waiting for command. "Good boy," Raymond whispered. He pointed to the ridge. "Stay close to Coulter." The dog hesitated, then obeyed, disappearing back into the dark. Raymond knelt again at the cables. The timers read 45 minutes, enough time to end a town. He followed the wires back toward the reservoir and saw the pipes bleeding steam into the water. It hissed where it met the surface, bubbles rising, the black sheen spreading wider. Then a voice called out above the roar. "Mr. Cole." Raymond looked up. Crane stood at the edge of the scaffold, gloved hands resting on the railing, his face half lit by floodlight. "I was told you'd retire," Crane said. "You and your mutt made quite a mess at Silver Creek. Do you have any idea what you're interfering with?" "Yeah," Raymond said. "With murder." Crane smiled, the kind of smile that never touched the eyes. "This isn't murder. It's maintenance. The world runs on compromise, Mr. Cole. Everyone should understand that." Raymond's breath steamed through gritted teeth. "The world runs on people like him." He pointed toward the distant town, invisible through the storm. "The ones drinking what you've poisoned." Crane's voice stayed calm. "And they'll keep drinking. You think one dying boy will change anything? You think your dog will make me confess?" Raymond took a step forward. "No, but they'll see what you've done." Coulter's voice broke through the comms, urgent. "They're wiring the trucks. You have less than 10 minutes." Raymond lunged toward the cables. Bullets cracked, tearing through the air, snapping branches beside him. Max's snarl echoed from the darkness, followed by a scream, one of the guards dropping. Coulter shouted something indistinct, his camera still rolling. The chaos unfolded fast, the kind of chaos only cowards create when caught. Raymond ripped the detonator wires free, sparks flying as circuits burned out. The smell of ozone filled the air. He stumbled, pain flaring in his leg, but he didn't stop. Then the first explosion hit, not the charges but the generator. Fire leapt up the scaffolding, devouring the tarps and equipment. Crane shouted orders, his men scattering like ash. Max ran through smoke, fur streaked with soot, barking toward the ridge. "Go!" Raymond yelled to Coulter. "Get it out! The footage! The proof!" Coulter nodded once, sprinting toward the slope, the camera clutched to his chest. Raymond turned back toward the platform. Crane was still there, trapped between fire and truth, the metal beneath his boots groaning. "This doesn't end with me," Crane shouted. "You can't bury industry." "No," Raymond said quietly, "but I can bury you." He pulled the last lever. The pumps reversed, releasing the pressure that had been building in the lines. The reservoir hissed, and then erupted. A column of steam shot skyward, glowing orange in the night. The poison ignited, fire skating across the water like veins of molten glass. It was beautiful, and it was hell. The sirens began moments later, real ones, wailing through the valley. Flashing lights pierced the smoke. Red, blue, white. Law enforcement trucks tore through the gates, tires skidding, officers shouting. The flames painted their faces gold as they rushed past him. Coulter appeared beside him again, coughing, soot-streaked, but smiling. "They saw it," he said. "It's all recorded. The files are safe." Raymond nodded. His hearing rang with the aftermath of the blast. Through the haze, he saw Crane on his knees, hands behind his head, surrounded by officers. The man's expensive coat was torn, his hair matted with sweat and ash. Justice didn't come in speeches. It came in floodlights and handcuffs. By dawn, the fire had thinned to smoke. The snow melted where it touched the scorched earth. The reservoir was no longer black. It had turned the dull gray of silt, still poisoned, but quieter now, waiting for time to heal what greed had broken. Raymond sat on the ridge, the lunchbox beside him, its metal dented but intact. Coulter stood a few paces away, silent, watching the trucks haul men in suits down the mountain road. Max lay at Raymond's side, one paw over his muzzle, chest rising and falling slow. The veteran reached down, running a hand along the shepherd's head. "We did it, boy." The wind shifted, carrying the faint scent of clean snow. The first sunlight cut through the clouds, landing soft on Raymond's shoulder. He closed his eyes, and for the first time in years, he didn't see ghosts, only faces smiling, proud, at peace. He'd stopped running from them. He'd finally become the man they believed he could be. The storm had passed with the quiet finality of an ending long overdue. The air above Silver Creek was raw, clean, almost foreign in its stillness. Sunlight spread over the valley like truth finally given permission to speak, not gentle but honest. The snow no longer glistened white. It gleamed clear, stripped of illusion. The poisoned river was frozen now, yet even beneath its ice, something like renewal stirred. At Silver Creek Medical, the generators hummed low, their rhythms steady for the first time in days. Nurses whispered in the hallways, trading exhaustion for cautious relief. Raymond moved through those corridors slowly, one hand brushing the wall as if to remind himself the world was still solid. His coat was torn at the shoulder, his hair damp with melted frost. Beside him, Max limped slightly, a quiet testament to the night's violence, but his tail swayed with contentment, slow and certain. They stopped outside room 203, the same room that had once been empty, now full again, of breath, of warmth, of second chances. Through the door's narrow window, a boy lay propped against white pillows, pale but alive. Samuel's chest rose and fell evenly beneath the soft wool blanket. His color had returned, not the flush of health yet, but the delicate hue of possibility. His prosthetic arm rested across his lap, the carved grain catching sunlight that spilled through the blinds, turning it amber. Max padded forward first, as he always did, his claws clicking gently on the tile. He reached the bedside and lay down, head against the mattress. Samuel stirred, eyelids fluttering open. When he saw the shepherd, his face broke into something fragile, not quite a smile, but close. "Hey, boy," he whispered. His voice was a rasp, small and unsteady. "You stayed." Raymond's voice came from the doorway, soft and hoarse. "He always does." The nurse, Lydia, the one who hadn't slept since the storm, entered quietly with a clipboard pressed to her chest. Her eyes, ringed by fatigue, carried the faint shimmer of good news. "Mr. Cole," she said, voice low, "there's someone you should see." Raymond turned, uncertain, until he saw the stretcher being wheeled down the corridor. Two orderlies pushed it slowly, careful with their precious cargo. The figure upon it was thin, wrapped in blankets, a face half shadowed by the tilt of an oxygen mask. "They found her last night," Lydia said, her words trembling with something between disbelief and gratitude. She was in a locked ward beneath the Silverpure facility, alive. Barely breathing, but alive. They'd hidden her there, Mr. Cole, like evidence. The world narrowed. Raymond felt the air leave his lungs in a rush. The storm, the fire, the poison, all of it blurred into one truth he hadn't dared hope for. He stepped aside as the stretcher entered the room. Sadie Bennett. The name itself carried weight. The woman who'd written. The reports. Who'd tried to expose what Silverpure had done. Who'd vanished when the company began cleaning up its tracks. Her hair, once a deep auburn, had faded into brittle strands of rust and gray. Her skin bore the pale translucence of someone who'd spent too long between life and its memory. Tubes trailed from her wrists. Machines whispered beside her bed, yet her presence filled the room like a memory restored. Samuel froze. His small hand gripped the blanket, knuckles white. "Mama!" The word broke out of him like a gasp. Lydia nodded gently. "She's been asking for you." The boy pushed himself upright, weak but determined. His bare feet slipped to the floor. Raymond took a half step forward, but didn't stop him. Max lifted his head, watching, unmoving. Sadie's eyelids fluttered. She turned toward the sound of her son's voice, confusion knitting her brow before recognition bloomed. Slow, radiant, undeniable. "Sammy?" she whispered. The oxygen mask muffled her words, but not their power. He crossed the space between them with the awkward gait of recovery, one small hand clutching the rail for balance. When he reached her, he reached out not with his good hand, but with the wooden one, the one carved by strangers, weathered by fear, strengthened by survival. She saw it and began to cry. The nurse quietly withdrew. Raymond stayed in the doorway, hat pressed to his chest. Samuel's voice trembled. "They told me you were gone." "I almost was," Sadie breathed, her eyes shining through the haze of tears. "But someone, didn't let go." Her hand rose, shaking, until it found his. She held it firmly, without pity, tracing the wood grain with her thumb as though it were sacred. "You've grown braver than I ever was." "Mama," Samuel whispered again, and the sound was a prayer, a release, a heartbeat. The room filled with silence, not the cold, sterile kind that lives in hospitals, but the soft, sacred stillness that comes after mercy has spoken. Lydia's hand went to her mouth. Even the machines seemed to slow, respecting the moment. Raymond turned slightly, blinking hard. Outside, sunlight broke across the snow like spilled gold. The ice along the window panes began to melt, droplets racing each other down the glass. In the distance, Workers in orange vests moved along the riverbanks, gathering the last of the poisoned barrels. For the first time in months, the water flowing through Silver Creek ran clear. He looked back into the room. Samuel had climbed onto the bed, his small frame curled gently against his mother's side. Sadie brushed a hand through his hair, whispering a lullaby too faint to hear. Max lay beside them, eyes half closed, tail moving once, twice. Raymond smiled. He didn't step in. He didn't need to. Some doors weren't meant to be crossed. They were meant to be guarded. He leaned his shoulder against the frame, watching quietly as sunlight spilled over the bed, painting the mother and child in soft gold. He spoke only to Max. "We did good, boy." The shepherd looked up at him, ears twitching, the faint rumble of a contented growl in his throat. Raymond's hand found his head, fingers pressing into the thick fur between his ears. "We did real good." They stood there for a long while, two silhouettes in the doorway, framed by the thawing light of morning. When Raymond finally stepped outside, the world greeted him with warmth instead of wind. The air smelled of pine and clean water. The snow beneath his boots was soft now, beginning to give underfoot. Coulter was waiting by the truck, camera bag slung across his back. His face was drawn but lighter, like a man who'd been forgiven. "You going somewhere?" he asked. "Yeah," Raymond said. "Home." Coulter nodded, glancing toward the hospital windows where faint shadows moved, the shape of a mother and her son. "They'll be all right," he said. "I know." Raymond climbed into the truck, Max hopping in beside him. For a moment he sat in silence, watching the steam rise from the exhaust, the condensation fade from the glass. Then he turned the key. The engine rumbled to life, steady and familiar. As they drove through town, people turned to wave. Some knew his name now. Most didn't. But they knew what he'd done. They knew the river burned, and then it healed. When they reached the ridge, Raymond stopped. The view stretched for miles, pine forests, rooftops, the glint of thawing snow. Down below, the creek shimmered beneath the sun like a scar that had decided to heal rather than hide. He opened the door and stepped out, boots crunching in the soft snow. Max followed, tail brushing the air. They stood side by side, looking down at Silver Creek. "Sometimes redemption doesn't roar," Raymond said quietly. "It waits, in patience, in faith, in fur." He looked at Max, who tilted his head, amber eyes reflecting the sky. "Come on, partner," Raymond whispered. "Let's head home." They walked until their figures blended into the light. A man and his dog, two survivors of a storm that had finally ended. Behind them, snowmelt trickled down the slope, carving a path clear and pure. Two sets of tracks marked their trail, one boot print, one paw print, side by side, leading home beneath the honest morning sun. In the quiet town of Silver Creek, a wounded soldier, a loyal dog, and a little boy reminded us that even in the coldest storms, kindness still burns warmer than fire. They showed that courage doesn't always wear a uniform. Sometimes it walks on four paws, or hides behind a child's fragile breath. And when the world turns gray, it's the small acts of loyalty, compassion, and truth that bring the light back. Maybe that's what this story was always about. The strength to stay, to care, and to believe that mercy still matters. If this story touched your heart tonight, I hope you'll stay with us. Subscribe, share, and keep these quiet tales of hope alive. Because somewhere, someone might still be waiting for a reminder that goodness hasn't left the world. Thank you for watching, for feeling, and for believing. even in silence. May your days be gentle, your nights peaceful, and may you always find light, even beneath the snow.